Have you ever been applying to a company? No matter what you do, no matter how much you try, you can't seem to get through, you can't seem to get a basic interview, and you certainly can't get hired. But even worse, what if it was your former employer, where you left on good terms, you're perfectly qualified for their job, and they won't even give you time of day? In other words, have you been blacklisted? Well, unfortunately, you're not crazy. This actually is a thing. And companies like Meta have confirmed that they do indeed keep a block list. So in this video, I want to explain what exactly that means, if you can determine whether or not you're even on one, and what you can potentially do about it. But before we get into that, if you're tired of being at the mercy of employers who seem to hold all of the cards, it's crucial that you begin the process of reclaiming control over your career. And some people have asked questions about how do I actually do this? Well, you're in luck because I've created a free webinar that walks you through exactly what you need to do. So if you're interested in making your next job search easier and unlocking your true career potential, make sure you check it out. I'll leave a link in the comments below. So there was a recent expose on Business Insider where some former Meta employees found out the hard way that they're actually being blocked from ever being rehired. In other words, they're on a do not hire list. And it's really interesting how they found out about it. I want to walk through the article with you and then give you my perspective on, do other employers also do this? So let's go and check out the article and break it down. So here's the article on Business Insider. It says Meta keeps block lists of ex-employees, and even help from a VP can't get you off of it. I've actually heard of this before, and I wasn't quite sure if it was actually true, but come to find out, my suspicions were correct. So a really interesting expose. Basically what it says is that this senior engineer who got caught up in Meta's 2022 layoffs, this massive wave of layoffs, as you recall, like I think they were kind of on the forefront of laying people off. They were one of the first major tech companies to kind of quote unquote break, but they laid off a ton of people. It's like 10,000 plus people. And you have to keep in mind that at the time, these were not considered performance-based layoffs. They were just layoffs of certain business groups that were being de-emphasized. So a lot of the people who had gotten laid off were, like it says here, exceeding expectations, which is one of the stronger ratings that met on Meta's performance scale. So these people, in this case, had been fairly tenured, worked for 4 years and received this rating. And it says a year before, the engineer had earned a coveted promotion into a senior technical role. So they were probably in potentially a principal level engineering role. So their work has been praised by their skip level manager, so the person 2 up from them, who told them in email that their contributions were critical to the company's success. It's like this kind of stuff happens so frequently where you get these emails, these people telling you that you're critical to their success, and then a week later you get laid off, or you get promoted and you get a big raise or a big bonus, and then a week later they decide you're no longer valuable to the company, and then they put you on a layoff list. And we've seen that happen so frequently. So it's almost like a little bit of an empty praise, but nonetheless, I guess it's good to have it. It says they were told that their layoff was simply a business decision. How many of us are familiar with that exact wording? This is simply a business decision. It's not personal. It's not performance related, and that multiple hiring managers wanted them back on their teams. Now, this actually could be the truth, that other hiring managers do indeed want you. They saw your performance, they really liked you, and everything else not being accounted for, they would indeed hire you back onto their team if they were allowed to. But then these human resources policies step in, and you're suddenly blacklisted. And that's exactly what happened to these folks. So it says after applying, this is guys laid off now, applying for nearly 20 positions in the year after they were let go, the engineer started to notice a pattern. The hiring manager would express interest in bringing them back. Again, they're probably not privy to this information, that they're on a block list. But then they even go as far as to set up the screening call with the recruiter, which is the first stage of their multi-step process. And then their own internal, the recruiter for the company they used to work for would actually ghost them, which admittedly is chicken shit. If the recruiter engaged the candidate, and especially if this is considered to be a rehire, and they later found out that they're on a block list, have the gonads to follow up with it and just tell them. People just want closure. I don't know why that is so difficult. But nonetheless, this guy was finding apparently that recruiters were continuing to ghost him, and obviously, and rightfully so, frustrated, this engineer asks the hiring manager what's happening, and the hiring manager is the one that actually learns what's going on. It says the recruiting team had forbid the hiring manager from contacting the engineer because they were deemed ineligible for rehire. In other words, they were scarlet lettered for whatever reason. Again, keeping in mind, this person left this job under the pretext that they were a highly valuable contributor. The step level manager giving this great feedback. They were told it wasn't performance related. So this person's just kind of probably beside themselves. And he said that this was the first time I had any real indication that I was on some kind of list. Now, evidently, Meta maintains these internal lists that bar some former employees from joining the company. And this is according to 5 former employees, including 2 managers. And it continues that Meta uses multiple systems to track rehire ineligibility, including a non-regrettable attrition designation and a do not hire flag, although what mechanisms and number of people affected remain unclear. And I can confirm that most companies do indeed track this information in, not necessarily in the applicant tracking system, but more on the HRIS system. So the systems where you get hired in and you actually all of your employment data is in there. And every time we would go to rehire a candidate, somebody that was coming back into the organization, and it didn't matter how long ago they were an employee, we would always go through a check and balance. So I would have to contact the human resource department, who would then go and do their due diligence and then come back to us with either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Now, we weren't, as recruiters, able to see this flagging in most cases, although there was one company where I was able to see it. But nonetheless, what is happening here is relatively common in industry. It says while the Business Insider couldn't provide a comprehensive list, we were able to show that managers encountered systematic barriers when trying to rehire certain employees. You have to keep in mind here, as tech companies are aggressively pursuing efficiency, that's kind of the new word, reading into efficiency as we're going to bring in AI and then we're going to lay off a whole bunch of people and tell them it's not performance-based. And then Meta actually switched that around and said, actually, now all of our layoffs going forward are performance-based. So not only can't you rejoin Meta, but now you have this scarlet letter for everybody, knowing that if you got laid off from Meta in the last year, you are now a scarlet lettered poor performer that didn't contribute, that will not be eligible for rehire. And I mean, there can't help but be some level of bias from the hiring managers in Silicon Valley who are looking at people from Meta under, that lens. And that's not, obviously, it's not a very fair thing for somebody that's just trying to get back to work. And in a lot of cases, may have been a fine performer, but for whatever reason, just got on the Meta, the wrong side of Meta's rehiring systems. It says, but for employees hoping to return to these tech fields, these rehiring restrictions create an invisible barrier for an already competitive job market, which is absolutely the truth. And what's interesting is that it's not something that you can necessarily check. You can't call up your company and ask whether or not you're on this list, because they'll never disclose it to you. But how these people were finding out, at Meta at least, and this is probably a common way to find out, is you can apply for the job, you can keep on getting rejected and have no idea what's going on and get frustrated, which is probably what most people do, and you'll never really be able to link that you were on a do not hire list. But other people are finding that they had either a third-party headhunting agency, like a recruiter, contacting them for this job. They get them engaged on it. The recruiter's excited because you have a good fit, you have good experience. They go to submit your candidacy to the company, and then the company reviews the application, the candidate that the third party has submitted, and then comes back to them with like, yeah, actually, we can't hire this one. This one's on a do not hire list. So now the third party has to go back to the candidate and then discloses, unfortunately, we can't get you through this one. You're on their do not hire list. And that's how a lot of these Meta folks ended up finding out. They found out through their third party contractors. So now you're sitting there scratching your head going, well, what the heck did I do? Well, what workplace policies did I violate? And in a lot of cases, you didn't violate any policies, but there are some surefire ways to get on this list. And this includes violating workplace policies, stealing confidential information. You're likely not going to be able to or be eligible for rehire if you're an underperformer. But in this case, some of these cases where it wasn't clear cut, managers actually evidently had broad discretion to add names to this list without documented performance issues. So what that means is if you pissed off your employer, you pissed off your manager didn't like you for whatever reason, or maybe even potentially another manager non-related, evidently they could put you onto this list without you knowing about it or having a documented trail, and it's basically becomes gospel. It says, if a manager didn't like you, it wasn't hard to put somebody on this list. And this is coming from a former manager. And of course, the official spokesperson, the PR person for Meta, says that there is clear criteria for being marked ineligible for rehire, but that does not seem to be the case. And they say that some of these criteria would be at the time of separation, the reason for the separation. So if you quit your job, you kick over the planter, you give everybody a FU, and you walk out the door without any notice, which is kind of been the popular thing with the rage quitting and all this stuff that we've seen over the last, these trends that we've seen over the last few years. You're likely to be put on a do not hire list and permanently banned, even if the manager that you did that to and all the people associated with it are gone from the business too. So if you look back and you say, hey, nobody actually works there anymore, maybe I can slide back in. No can do, because they will have you basically, it's like tattooed into your employment file, and that will pretty much follow you permanently. So policy violation, obviously performance termination, voluntary resignations potentially could even get you on to the list, even if you did everything right. Potentially voluntarily separating, depending on the circumstance. Then that, along with last ratings prior to separation and any other performance signals. So those are some obvious things. But again, these managers say that they can just fill out a form and they can put any real issue that they want to on there. They don't like you, you can end up on this thing. So it would only take minutes for somebody to get marked as non-regrettable. And the manager would get an email asking if the turnover was non-regrettable attrition. In other words, did they want the person to quit? Or were they not happy about the person quitting because it left a hole in their team and they actually would have liked to retain the person? So, if you upset your manager, it's really pretty crazy what they can do to blacklist you. So functionally what happens to people typically is when they're on this do not hire list and they're engaging with the recruiter, the communication is really smooth. It's really consistent. They're excited about your candidacy. And then once you interact with the company on some deeper level, suddenly things start to slow down significantly. And you start to wonder, the communication gaps start to become longer. You start getting more vague answers. And then before you know it, you just receive this random rejection letter and you're like, what the heck is going on? Because you didn't seemingly do anything wrong. But that's how they would basically handle it. And that's oftentimes because they're marked ineligible to be rehired. So this is obviously the scenario when you have had a former relationship with the company, in this case Meta, but I'm suspecting that there are other companies who also have similar policies. I'm aware of another one in the big tech space as well. But what about if you're going for a job and you don't know anybody at the company? Can you be blacklisted too? The long and short of it is actually, yes, you can be, and it's a little bit more ambiguous. And usually what it is if you're applying for the same job over and over and over again, or you're applying for all kinds of different jobs at the company, and you might have 30 or 40 different applications in, it's not a formal do not hire, but it's kind of an informal thing where the staffing teams will see your application activity or history, and they'll kind of bias against it. Sometimes the hiring managers will come in and say, well, this guy has applied for all of these jobs and none of these other hiring managers have given them a shot, or maybe they've gone through the interview process with some of these other ones. Like Amazon, we used to see that. If you went through loops with other hiring teams and were not successful, we would see it and there would be assigned a disposition status, and it would often be accompanied by a recycle period. And what they mean by recycling is you can recycle in as a candidate for a different role after a certain period of time. In most cases, if it was a technical skill or competency that you were lacking, say you went through the technical screen and you just didn't do well in your coding or whatever, you could recycle after 6 months. So you could go, in theory, go practice your coding, and then you could come back in 6 months and you could go through another loop and not have it held against you. If you were removed from the interview process because you failed what they called leadership principles, so think the behavior-based interview, the leadership principles, then there was often no recycling for you. So you were basically banned from the organization permanently because of this status. And so that would be a case where somebody could actually get on a blacklist even though you weren't previously working at the company. And again, touching on if you're applying for job after job after job, there is a bias that comes up either from the recruiter or from the hiring manager or the hiring team saying, if this guy has continually been rejected by other teams or not been considered by other teams, what's wrong with them? Why haven't they been able to get through? Like there was one guy, and I remember that he had, and it wasn't for my role, but I could see the activity on the back end of our applicant tracking system. And he had applied for something like 150 different jobs in the period of about 2 years. And he had gone through a couple of loops, interview processes, and was not successful. And there was a lot of notes in there about him. But the kind of the reaction was for the hiring managers when we would look at them is, well, why wasn't this guy getting hired by any one of these other 200 teams? And so he, in theory, was able to reapply for jobs and be able to interview for them, but functionally he had blacklisted himself because he had applied to so many positions. So what I would recommend that you do, if you find a company that you really love and a job type that you really love, you can apply to more than one job. This is not saying that you should be afraid to do that, but if you're applying for every single job that they have on their applicant tracking system just to try to get your foot in the door, it does look spammy, especially if the jobs are completely unrelated. In other words, you're applying to this job and this other job in this other department that's completely unrelated, then this third job that's completely unrelated to the last two, and you're basically just spamming your resume out to this company. There is a circumstance where you could get blacklisted even though you're not technically blacklisted. The last thing I want to touch on is the final way that employers can potentially blacklist you from opportunities or organizations. And it's called a backdoor reference. And if you're not familiar with what a backdoor reference is, essentially, if you're interviewing for a company and somebody on the hiring team says, hey, wait a minute, I think I know somebody who worked at this guy's previous company. They then contact that person and say, hey, Joe is interviewing for this role. What do you think about him? And then that person gives their opinion. And I've seen firsthand backdoor references sink more than one candidate's chances at an opportunity and potentially being blacklisted altogether. Now, this is something that you're likely never going to know about because it happens behind the scenes. But rest assured, especially in small industries, this does indeed happen. So that's the deal. Some employers do actively use a do not hire list, and they will use it against you. But the fortunate thing is I don't believe that this is a widespread practice, so it's not something I would lose a ton of sleep over, unless maybe you wanted to work for Meta or some other big tech company. But the world's full of other employers, so there's no use in crying over one particular company's policies that might be a little bit ridiculous. And if it's me, I'm more focused on building a career with high conviction and authority. In other words, I'm reclaiming control, and I don't have time for employers who play games like that. And if that sounds like something that you want to do, go and check out my website, alifeafterlayoff.com, which can teach you exactly how to do that too. Anyway, I thought this was an interesting article. If you found value in this video, would appreciate a thumbs up and maybe hit that subscribe button so you can help support the channel. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.